Hey guys, this is the course on consciousness. Suppose evil scientists removed your brain from your body while you slept and set it up in a life support system in a vat. Suppose they then set out to trick you into believing that you were not just a brain in a vat, but still up and about, engaging in a normally embodied round of activities in the real world. This old saw, the brain in the vat, is a favorite thought experiment in the toolkit of many philosophers. It is a modern-day version of Descartes' 1641 evil demon, an imagined illusionist bent on tricking Descartes about absolutely everything, including his own existence. But as Descartes observed, even an infinitely powerful evil demon couldn't trick him into thinking he himself existed if he didn't exist. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Philosophers today are less concerned with proving one's own existence as a thinking thing, perhaps because they have decided that Descartes' set told that matter quite satisfactorily, and more concerned about what, in principle, we may conclude from our experience about our nature, and about the nature of the world in which we, apparently, live. Might you be nothing but a brain in a vat? Might you have always been just a brain in a vat? If so, could you even conceive of your predicament, let alone confirm it? The idea of the brain in the vat is a vivid way of exploring these questions, but I want to put the old saw to another use. I want to use it to uncover some curious facts about hallucinations, which in turn will lead us to the beginnings of a theory, an empirical, scientifically respectable theory of human consciousness. In the standard thought experiment, it is obvious that the scientists would have their hands full providing the nerve stumps from all your senses with just the right stimulations to carry off the trickery. But philosophers have assumed for the sake of argument that however technically difficult the task might be, it is possible in principle. One should be leery of these possibilities in principle. It is also possible in principle to build a stainless steel ladder to the moon and to write out, in alphabetical order, all intelligible English conversations consisting of less than 1,000 words. But neither of these are remotely possible in fact, and sometimes an impossibility in fact is theoretically more interesting than a possibility in principle, as we shall see. Let's take a moment to consider then just how daunting the task facing the evil scientists would be. We can imagine them building up to the hard tasks from some easy beginnings. They begin with a conveniently comatose brain, kept alive but lacking all input from the optic nerves, the auditory nerves, the somatosensory nerves, and all the other afferent or input paths to the brain. It is sometimes assumed that such a deferented brain would naturally stay in a comatose state forever, needing no morphine to keep it dormant. But there is some empirical evidence to suggest that spontaneous waking might still occur in these dire circumstances. I think we can suppose that were you to awake in such a state, you would find your sight in horrible straits, blind, deaf, completely numb, with no sense of your body's orientation. Not wanting to horrify you, then, the scientists arranged to wake you up by piping stereo music, suitably encoded as nerve impulses, into your auditory nerves. They also arrange for the signals that would normally come from your vestibular system or inner ear to indicate that you are lying on your back, but otherwise paralyzed, numb, bind. This much should be within the limits of technical virtuosity in the near future. Perhaps possibly even today. They might then go on to stimulate the tracts that used to innervate your epidermis, providing it with the input that would normally have been produced by a gentle, even warmth over the ventral belly surface of your body, and, getting fancier, they might stimulate the dorsal back epidermal nerves in a way that simulated the tingly texture of grains of sand pressing into your back. Great, you say to yourself, here I am, lying on my back on the beach, paralyzed and blind, listening to rather nice music, but probably in danger of sunburn. How did I get here, and how can I call for help? But now suppose the scientists, having accomplished all this, tackle the more difficult problem of convincing you that you are not a mere beach potato, but an agent capable of engaging in some form of activity in the world. Starting with little steps, they decide to lift part of the paralysis of your phantom body and let you wiggle your right index finger in the sand. They permit the sensory experience of moving your finger to occur, which is accomplished by giving you the kinesthetic feedback associated with the relevant volitional or motor signals in the output or efferent part of your nervous system. But they must also arrange to remove the numbness from your phantom finger and provide the stimulation for the feeling that the motion of the imaginary sand around your finger would provoke. Suddenly, they are faced with a problem that will quickly get out of hand, for just how the sand will feel depends on just how you decide to move your finger. The problem of calculating the proper feedback, generating or composing it, and then presenting it to you in real time is going to be computationally intractable on Event the Fastest computer. And if the evil scientists decide to solve the real-time problem by pre-calculating and canning all the possible responses for playback, they will just trade one insoluble problem for another. There are too many possibilities to store. In short, our evil scientists will be swamped by combinatorial explosion as soon as they give you any genuine exploratory powers in this imaginary world, too. It is a familiar wall these scientists have hit. We see its shadow in the boring stereotypes in every video game. The alternatives open for action have to be strictly and unrealistically limited to keep the task of the world representers within feasible bounds. If the scientists can do no better than convince you that you are doomed to a lifetime of playing Donkey Kong, they are evil scientists indeed. There is a solution of sorts to this technical problem. It is the solution used, for instance, to ease the computational burden in highly realistic flight simulators. Use replicas of the items in the simulated world. Use a real cockpit and push and pull it with hydraulic lifters instead of trying to simulate all that input to the seat of the pants of the pilot in training. In short, there is only one way for you to store for ready access that much information about an imaginary world to be explored, and that is Tao's aerial, if tiny or artificial or plaster of Paris, world to store its own information. This is cheating. If you're the evil demon claiming to have deceived Descartes about the existence of absolutely everything, but it's a way of actually getting the job done with less than infinite resources. Descartes was wise to endow his imagined evil demon with infinite powers of trickery. Although the task is not, strictly speaking, infinite, the amount of information obtainable in short order by an inquisitive human being is staggeringly large. Engineers measure information flow in bits per second, or speak of the bandwidth of the channels through which the information flows. Television requires a greater bandwidth than radio, and high-definition television has a still greater bandwidth. High-definition smellophilo television would have a still greater bandwidth, and interactive smellophilo television would have an astronomical bandwidth because it constantly branches into thousands of slightly different trajectories through the imaginary world. Throw a skeptica dubious coin and an asecond or two of hefting, scratching, ringing, tasting, and just plain looking at how the sun glints on its surface. The skeptic will consume more bits of information than a Cray supercomputer can organize in a year. Making a real but counterfeit coin is child's play. Making a simulated coin out of nothing but organized nerve stimulations is beyond human technology now and probably forever. Prelude: how are hallucinations possible? 7. One conclusion we can draw from this is that we are not brains in vats, in case you were worried. Another conclusion it seems that we can draw from this is that strong hallucinations are simply impossible. By a strong hallucination, I mean a hallucination of an apparently concrete and persisting three-dimensional object in the real world, as contrasted to flashes, geometric distortions, auras, afterimages, fleeting phantom limb experiences, and other anomalous sensations. A strong hallucination would be, say, a ghost that talked back, that permitted you to touch it, that resisted with a sense of solidity, that cast a shadow that was visible from any angle so that you might walk around it and see what its back looked like. Hallucinations can be roughly ranked in strength by the number of such features they have. Reports of very strong hallucinations are rare, and we can now see why it is no coincidence that the credibility of such reports seems, intuitively, to be inversely proportional to the strength of the hallucination reported. We are, and should be, particularly skeptical of reports of very strong hallucinations because we don't believe in ghosts, and we think that only a real ghost could produce a strong hallucination. It was primarily the telltale strength of the hallucinations reported by Carlos Castaneda in the Teachings of Don Juan, A Yaqui Way of Knowledge, 1968-1, that first suggested to scientists that the book, in spite of having been a successful PhD thesis in anthropology at UCLA, was fiction, not fact. But if really strong hallucinations are not known to occur, there can be no doubt that convincing multimodal hallucinations are frequently experienced. The hallucinations that are well attested in the literature of clinical psychology are often detailed fantasies far beyond the generative capacities of current technology. How on earth can a single brain do what teams of scientists and computer animators would find to be almost impossible? If such experiences are not genuine or veridical perceptions of some real thing outside the mind, they must be produced entirely inside the mind, or the brain, concocted out of whole cloth but lifelike enough to fool the very mind that concocts them.